can start.
Okay.
Joe, how are you? Good to see you. How are things
Good to see
going
you.
with you?
Things are good. Hey, I can't complain. I'm gainfully employed, and people keep seeming to want me to keep making shows after 30 years. This is nice.
This is amazing because I think I interviewed you for the very first thing you ever did, even though we're both 25, so I don't really understand
Oh,
that. But
it must have been a grade school thing. We were.
I think so. I think so. Well, listen, congratulations on this. And I have to ask you, look, my very first question is, after digging into these serial killers for so many years, how do you sleep at night?
um, I do sometimes my kids, I'm very careful with my children, and I always say, "Are you sure you know who that person is?" Or "You sure you should be going to?" So my kids do make fun of me a little bit. I'm a very protective daddy, so that's one impact. But
Yeah.
no, it's an excellent question because you take on a lot of these emotions, just like that Steve Nemmer's testimony in the
Yep.
show, the surviving victim is just
Yes.
heartbreaking. Particularly heartbreaking when you realize all of this could have been avoided had the police had a different attitude towards the LGBTQ community back or everyone should have, if everyone had a
Wow.
different attitude. I think a lot of these deaths could have been avoided. But to your particular question, it is a big responsibility to tell somebody's story and to tell it
Hmm.
with care and concern. Um, and I do, it is hard. Early in my career, when I was when Bruce and I were editing, Bruce Sinofsky was my filmmaking partner.
Yes.
You probably
Yeah.
know, who passed away sadly about 8 years, 7 years ago in
Yeah.
2015. But I remember we were editing Paradise Lost. So I don't know if you've seen Paradise Lost about the
I
West
have. I've
Story.
seen all your stuff. Yep.
Oh, thank you. So, and back that was actually the last film that I edited or we edited on film. Like 16 millimeter work print and sound on the 16 mag stripe. Like it was avid and non-linear editing was just happening, but we still edited that film
Right.
because we were used to that. And the reason I mention it is you spent a lot longer time looking at each scene because you're literally, taking a piece of film and ripping the splices when you want to make an edit. And so it was a particular week where I had a new baby at home, probably 11 or 12 months in her crib, my first child.
Hmm.
And I was spending an inordinate amount of time looking at the grossest stuff that nobody should look at,
Right.
particularly a new father. Autopsy photos of these 8-year-olds who had been horribly brutalized,
Ugh.
crime scene video, just terrible autopsy reports. And so we were at that phase of the production trying to decide how much is too much and looking at stuff. And I remember driving home, coming into my daughter's nursery, picking her up, and just flashing on these horrible injuries and these horrible images while trying to have a tender moment with my child, being a new father.
Yeah.
And I resented the project because I felt like doing this film while I'm a new father was really kind of robbing me of my fatherly innocence because after all I had stared into the abyss of evil.
Right.
And I really resented the project. So from that point on, I really made an effort to separate my brain, to compartmentalize, and do the best I can. But you can't help but feel for these people, and so that
Yeah.
that inspires in me a mission that if you're going to dwell in this material, you have to do it in a responsible way. I mean, let's face it, this genre gets a lot of, particularly in the last couple of years, this genre gets a lot of criticism, like we are just, taking advantage of victims, and
Right.
we have no moral compass, and I've heard all sorts of things. And there is a lot of work out there that just honestly wallows in the misery of others without any social justice context to it. So for me to do anything I choose to do, it has to have that element of social justice. You have to
Hmm.
have a larger reason for telling the story than just the tragedy. And so I've turned down a lot of projects that I don't feel have that potential. So I try to always look at things through a social justice lens, and I try to be a responsible storyteller, so that if the victim was watching the show, how would they feel about it? And
Absolutely.
I just
Yeah.
put it through that filter, so that helps me kind of deal with it. If I'm going to be in this world, I got to have a reason for it.
Yeah.
And for me, the reason to do Gacy is twofold. One is that aforementioned daughter who was 11 or 12 months, as a when I was contemplating doing the Bundy series,
Hmm.
uh, the tapes kind of came my way, and I was pitched on the idea of doing a show based on the tapes. And I thought, this is 2019. I thought to myself, well, Bundy's kind of a well-worn tire. It's been done so many times. Like,
Right.
should I do this or not? Like, the tapes were fascinating, but you know, will this even work? Because it's an old story. And I turned to my daughter. Both of my daughters were home from college, very bright women who are going to, well, graduated from excellent colleges, very bright. I know I,
Yeah.
I know I sound like a proud daddy, but
But as you should, but
but at dinner, I said, "Do you guys know who Ted Bundy is?" And neither of my daughters knew. And,
amazing.
and I said,
Really?
text,
Wow.
text your friends. And most of them didn't know. A couple did, but didn't know the details. So that to me said, okay, there is a place for telling this story to a new generation, because you can't overstate the lessons of Bundy or Gacy enough,
Hmm.
which is, just because somebody looks and acts a certain way, it doesn't mean you should trust them. And and that's something you can't overstate, particularly in a world where fake Uber drivers have abducted and killed people, or people present themselves one way and they're actually another on the internet
Well,
all the time.
exactly. You can't always, you can look at somebody and look completely normal, I mean, yeah, it's a
The
story, we could
the
talk forever about that, but with
the
with
common
Gacy,
the
sorry, go
common
ahead.
the common misperception, mainly because of fictional movies, the common misperception is that the serial killer, or the person who does evil 24/7 around the clock, and that gives you
Right.
this false sense of comfort that you can easily identify them, so
Yeah.
that you won't become a victim. But the truth is, in my 30 years of doing true crime, it's the people you least expect and most often trust, whether it's a priest who commits pedophilia, or Bernie
Yeah.
Madoff preying on the Jewish community. It's the people you most often trust and least expect who do evil. And so
100%.
that's a lesson to put out there for my children. So
Yeah.
that dinner time conversation with my daughters made me feel like, okay, I was on the right track. Little did I know I would end up doing a movie and a doc series, and that they would both be so popular.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's completely fascinating, Joe. And like I said, I mean, you really pick these subjects. And with Gacy, with this one, I mean, you had 60 hours of audio and all this archival footage. I mean, does it ever get easier going through all of this stuff? How do you decide to bring this into, like, it's a 3-part series?
Yeah.
It could probably have been a 10-part series, I'm sure, if you
It
wanted
could,
to.
it could. Actually, at one point it was 4, and we decided to make it 3 because it just was tighter storytelling.
Yeah.
The goal is always to get people to watch all 3 in one sitting, or 4 in one sitting. So like that's, I love when that happens. And statistically, that with Bundy, people binged it like crazy. So
Right.
I like to keep it at, just because you have the opportunity for 10 episodes doesn't mean something necessarily should be 10 episodes or whatever. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
but but the larger point is, how we went through everything.
Yeah, just making the decision as to what I mean, that he had a lot to say. I mean, it was fascinating, some of what we heard in this.
Yeah.
I mean, it just, wow.
Look, in the old days, I would largely, often with Bruce, or when I did projects by myself in the old days, it would be, all we did for 2.5 years was Brothers Keeper, and we did all aspects of it. And then for Paradise Lost, all we did was Paradise Lost.
Right.
Luckily, I'm in the stage of my career where I have a team, and so I can't say I did all this myself. And how do I do it? So how I do it is I have a great team. Catherine Park was the showrunner on the show, and she did a
Hmm.
fantastic job. And guy named Ted Schillinger was the co-executive producer, did a great job, and then under them are, a great group of people. So, um, yeah, it's not as daunting as it sounds when when you have a great team. You have to make the right decisions, of course, and that's where I think I have a good sense of story and what works and what doesn't work. But
Yeah.
I got a good team behind me.
Well, for sure, you can't do anything without it. Obviously, you can't go through all this stuff by yourself. I'm wondering, I'm watching this and it, as we said, I mean, it happened so many years ago. And you mentioned this very briefly when you were chatting earlier, but I always find it like, how hard is it to go back to somebody who has maybe kind of put this away, maybe can't come to peace with it. And then you approach them to do an interview and kind of rehash it again. How difficult was that? As you said, like with that surviving victim, I mean, unbelievably heartbreaking to watch
Yeah.
that.
Uh, some people were happy to talk. Some people required some coaching and not coaching. That's not the right word. Uh, Coaxing is the word.
Well, yeah, I guess some empathy has to be there too, I suppose,
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, luckily, at this point, I have a long track record, so my work kind of speaks for itself, and so people are more trusting of me, say, than maybe some other situation. This one I was, disappointed that not more family members wanted to talk, but on the other hand, most of them were like, they weren't resentful that we were doing the show, but they feel like this has been talked about enough.
right.
So I did appreciate. There are quite a few people in the show who haven't talked before. Some people in law enforcement. The Steve Nemmers hadn't talked before, and
Right.
it was, so, uh, you know, some, yeah, there's no one answer. You just have to treat people with respect and hope that they see the value of the project. And so you have to have, a clear mission in mind. And, when I explained, I wanted to kind of pull back the curtain on how the social values of the day, allowed this crime to go undetected for so long. I think people appreciated that point of view. Um, you know, the and to be clear, you know, I think the police, you know, law, those members of law enforcement who participated in the show, who were
Mhm.
involved in the Robert Peast investigation and involved in the excavation of the house, I think acted heroically and were totally committed to the case.
Yeah.
It's all the victims and all the police departments before, that were affected by the social values of the day, couldn't help but have their prejudice
Yeah.
because of those values. That's the culprit here, not the guys in the show who actually, did the investigation of Peast and took the house apart. Those guys, I think, were very heroic.
Yeah, well, look, you've done another sensational job. I don't know what it is about true crime. I mean, people are just so obsessed with it, honestly. But you always do such justice to it, and I appreciate your work and thank you for waiting me out today and
No
working out
problem.
all this internet stuff. But I appreciate your time. I
No
really
problem.
do. Thank you, Joe.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. I
All
appreciate
right,
it. All
take
right.
care.
Take
Have a
care.
good one. Okay, bye
Thanks,
bye.
buddy.
You're welcome. Bye, guys.
Hey, Steve, can you call me